I've never met a company yet. I've never ever met a company. So what I mean by that, people say I work for such and such a company. Companies don't exist. There are only people. So I work with people, and I work in the leadership space because I actually truly believe that if you want to influence, if you want to make the greatest influence in the future, then work with leaders, because leaders can have a disproportionate impact on their communities. They're influencers by nature. So I always think that a leader is someone who influences people or influences outcomes and influences the results or what happens in the world. And if you want to bring about change, or you want to have any change that has any meaning, then deal with leaders. So that's why I deal with leaders. So when I work in the leadership space, I'm looking for anything that gets in the way of them producing the results that they want to produce.
Sure.
So really I'm not interested in putting more stuff in. I'm looking at anything that might be in the way for them, and generally that's the case. There are things that stop us or prevent us from either doing the things that we want to do, or producing the results that we want to produce, or getting the outcomes that we want in our lives. It's generally things get in the way, rather than putting more stuff in is not necessarily going to get you there. So when I'm working with people, I'm always looking for what are the things that are in the way for them, and what can I take out of the space or support them to take out of the space. So that's what I'm looking for. Well, if you look at the link between being and performance, you see we actually are the results we produce. Yeah? So when people say, people would sort of, if you're being successful, or you're being a leader, then it's actually demonstrated in the results that you produce. So you can turn around and say, I'm the best tennis player on the planet. Unless you're producing those results, then you're not that. Does that make sense? So when we talk about being, each individual wants to be a particular way. Everyone. So if you have kids, they want to be, a pilot, or they want to be a policeman or a fireman, or whatever it might be. They want to be something. But even as we get older, we still have aspirations for something that we want to be. So we want to be better parents. We want to be better leaders. We want to be better husbands, better wives, better partners. We want to be. Sometimes it might be we just want to be the best version of ourselves, but it's always about who we're being. So it's perfect to look at who you're being right now, and who you want to be, and what's the gap between the two. The being profile is unique. It's absolutely unique. I haven't come across any other tool that deals directly with your relationship with who you're being right now. So most other tools that I've come across, they deal with things like personality, they deal with behavior, they deal with all these different things, but they don't look at fundamentally who you're being. And one of the greatest things is it actually looks at not just a couple of areas, it looks at a vast number of areas. I think there's nearly 30 different areas that it looks at, and each of those areas, they're all unique. And if you look at it, I love to think about it, it's like a little bit like the DNA. We've all got unique strands of DNA. We've also got unique relationships with ourselves in who we're being. So I can, as a coach, it's incredibly powerful. So I often describe it like doing a diagnostic. If I'm taking my car in to get a service, you'll plug it into a diagnostic tool, and it will show me the areas that I can look at or should pay attention to. Or even recently, I had somebody come to my house, and they did this diagnostic tool which they look for the state of the house with termites and insects. It can show me, what things I should do. So the Being Profile is a very powerful diagnostic tool for coaches, which uncovers some of those areas that we can look to develop or reinforce or transform. People describe themselves in certain ways all the time. So they will say, I'm a good something, right? So I'm a good, I know I'm a good soccer player, or they'll say I'm not very good at something else. What they're talking about is actually not the ability to do something, it's their belief in who they actually are and who they're being around that. So people will say to you, I'm a good manager. It's about whether they're being a good manager or not. So there are certain fundamental ways that we are, and some of those that we look at, like in the being profile, is we will look at things like authenticity. Authenticity is an interesting word, right? But authenticity, we associate authenticity with being real or not being real. So what it does is it deals with whether we consider who we're being to be real or fake. And if you think about it from a leadership perspective, and we look at politicians, most of us can identify in a heartbeat whether somebody is authentic or not. So these are some of the fundamental building blocks, and in particular, I look at them being working in the leadership space. Some of these are not only the fundamental building blocks, but they're the critical building blocks if you want to be a powerful leader, a successful leader, a high-performing leader. These are some of the fundamental building blocks. In the past, I've been a CEO for over 20 years. In various roles, small businesses, tiny, organizations, and some very large organizations. And if you're a CEO, then you have to be interested in performance. It's crazy to consider that you're a CEO or a leader in a business and you're not interested in performance. And I've always known that there's a direct link between an individual's performance and how they are. Let's not even go into the conversation about being, but I've always known that how they are as a person impacts their performance. So if there's someone who is disciplined, for example, I knew that a disciplined person is likely to show up on time, is to do what they say they will do. If they're a reliable person, then there's certain things. If somebody's a reliable person, you know that you can give them tasks to do and they will complete them. But I never really had the tools to actually look at them specifically and deliberately. So there was a lot of guesswork involved. When I first came across the tool, when we first started working with the tool, it was really like discovering, it's a bit like, I would imagine that doctors had the same thing. When you first discovered white and red blood cells, it opens up a whole new world. And now you've got a whole raft of different things that you can actually do. And you can get very specific in some of the conversations that you would have with people. And you can actually bring about change in those areas that you potentially couldn't bring about before. So I think that the biggest shift for me is when I started coaching, and I've been coaching for almost 10 years now. Even in the past as a coach, the tools that I had to use were not up to the standards of the being profile. So they just haven't given me the depth to actually do that work to bring around about the change. I've been doing this for not a long time, but a reasonably long time. And I tend to use the same way of introducing the concept of being to people. Is I ask people a question. I generally ask people questions. So as a coach, my job as a coach is to ask lots of questions, and along the way is hopefully ask the right question that's going to lead someone to discover the right answers, right? Anyway, with the being profile, the introduction to the concept of being, is I ask people to look at what they think the link between being and performance is. So what's the link between who you're being, either right now, to performance? And generally, what we discover, we do the unpacking along the way, is that who we're being really is determined by our beliefs in ourselves, the beliefs that we have, our values, the things that we value, and that determines how we behave. So who we're being determines how we behave, and how we behave gives us the results or the performance that we produce in our lives. Now, once you go into that space, then the conversation is, so if who we're being determines our performance, then it makes sense to actually deal with who we're being rather than the focus on the actual results themselves. So it's simple. Now the question is, now what do I do about that? How do I change that? What do I do with it? But the first place to look is you want to get a clear insight, because if I ask you, tell me what are some of your fundamental ways of being, or tell me some of the key things about you that you know about yourself. It's a challenge because you kind of don't know where to look. Yeah, so typical for someone would be, I ask you, if I say, how are you being today? What's your general reaction is, I'm okay, I'm good. It's a really general thing. But if I start to ask you, tell me how responsible you think you are. Yeah? Tell me how courageous you think you are. And some of these things will change, but overall, if I start to ask you the questions, I'm actually going to take you into a whole different space. And that's one of the things that the being profile does. It asks you questions and has you look in some of those areas. And for a lot of people, they've never been asked questions like that before. They've never actually had to look. Actually, I would say almost. You can never say 100%, but I would guess that almost 100% of people who have completed the being profile have never been asked those questions before. So in itself, if nothing else, that will have people look in places they've never had to look before. Until you're aware of something, you can't change it. You can't do anything about it. And for most of us, as I've indicated, a lot of this is it's a blind spot for people. Like, they can't put their finger on it. They don't know. They're not sure. They may be able to sense it, or kind of like they got a sense of it, but they're not sure. So even if I ask people about confidence, there's a kind of I think it might be this, but there's a lack of surety around that. So once I start the conversation and we do the work that we do with the being profile, we uncover, like we actually clearly uncover some of the areas that they can actually put their attention on. So the being profile on its own will make no difference unless the individual is committed to making a difference. So it's insightful, but it really works to work with someone, because it's like anything. I could give you a blood test. So I could give you the results of a blood test and you won't know what to do with it. So it really works to work with someone with the being profile, so that they can actually, once you've uncovered the results, that you can have the conversations and then you can look at where you can go with that. Yeah. So it is hugely insightful, and it makes sense that you actually do it with somebody, because if you think about it, a lot of our ways of being are interlinked. In actual fact, there's threads between all of them. So if you look at things like courage impacts a lot of different areas. So confidence and courage, for example, could be linked. Yeah. If you're looking at authenticity actually takes courage. So there'd be a link between courage and authenticity. Or if you look at other aspects like compassion, there'll be links between compassion and generosity in those areas. So it really works to work with somebody who understands the ins and outs, the intricacies of the profile to get the best results from it.